to mention, so that the record is complete. The board received a written comment from Jay and Patricia Moriali, was dated June 6, 2022.
Yes.
That email, which is a couple of pages, was circulated to all the board members for their consideration. I'm not going to read through the entire comment since everyone had that email, but I just would want that incorporated into the record for today's hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
Deborah? Oh, you did, Diane, or I see Deborah had her hand raised. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to say that when Ms. McManus said earlier this evening that the environmental issues are well understood by the governing body, I don't think that's true. It's a 1,000-page report. So we don't have a clear understanding of that at all. I don't think that's fair. And now that I know no one else has seen that, I don't know who's read the 1,000 pages or even the summary at the end. I'm still not clear on who's paying for that. Even if RPM pays, it's really Millburn Township that pays. So we don't know what that's going to cost. As far as making the density more equitable, I think that is a really important piece of this puzzle, because we're not just voting on 9 Main Street. You're passing this entire packet to the Township Committee, which is including all those overlay zones that will forever change the town. And Mr. Buzak, why don't we just explain what happens if this doesn't pass tonight? Because I don't know how these people are going. I don't know how this is going. I know how I'm going to vote, obviously. I don't know how you're all going to vote. So, Mr. Buzak, what happens if you don't get a majority this evening?
If the housing element and fair share plan doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. And you know, in terms of the legal ramifications, as I said, I'm happy to talk to the board about that in closed session, but I'm not prepared to provide that advice in open session.
I don't understand that. I mean, I think we should all know what the ramifications are going to be. And again, closed sessions, because then closed sessions, we can't reveal anything.
That was the response of our attorney. Yeah, I understand.
I'm sorry, but I don't find that clear enough and acceptable for me. I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but if we have a closed session after the fact, why didn't we have a closed session before so people understand what they're doing this evening if they are uncomfortable? And if it doesn't pass, because we are uncomfortable, do we get sued? Can we go back to fair share housing as Tara and I did, as Ms. Stone pointed out, take a vote that we wanted to go back to fair share housing and clear up some of these items that are of uncomfortable nature to the town?
Well, I know Mr. Buzek said he's not comfortable discussing it. I would just re-raise something that had been discussed at the June 1st meeting that comes to mind, which is that the builder's remedy case, I believe we would remain vulnerable to such situation if we don't have a adopted plan in place. But I can't speak to any more, and I'm not our attorney, so I can't speak to all the legal.
I think we should have had a closed session before so people understand the ramifications if they wanted more clarification or more time. But, you know.
I hear you. Okay. Deborah, you had your hand raised.
I did. Mr. Feld had brought up the idea of attaching the ordinances to the agreement. Is this when we would make a motion for that, or how does that work?
He did, and that was on my mind. But Beth, as she mentioned, that the ordinances are, it's sort of, I don't know if you want to speak maybe Beth more to it, but like sort of which comes first, the plan versus the ordinances. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, or maybe Graham could as well.
Well, I think let's see. So typically the housing plan leads because it sets the policy basis. When we're talking about the inclusionary housing ordinances, which I think are more relevant to the concerns people have expressed, typically the plan leads because that provides the policy basis, the master plan basis for adopting those ordinances and for potentially a finding for consistency with the master plan. So I think there are a couple of things that the board should know. One, I'll defer to Ed as to whether or not you can make a motion to include a list and how that might work. I don't want to insert myself into legal questions more so than I sometimes can't help myself. But the other thing is, once this, as I mentioned at one point, all of these documents need to be submitted to the court. So for folks that might be concerned about being able to track documents, you know, what ordinances, what documents were subject to the court approval, what's related to this housing element and fair share plan and what isn't. So in part, that process will be answered through the court, to the court process. And if the municipality decides for the purposes of transparency that you'd like to have a package of everything that was approved by the court subsequent to that court approval process, I'm sure that's something that, well, I'm certain that that's something I'm happy to work with the township on. If you're looking for, like I said, for transparency purposes, to have a complete package of all the documents that are relevant. Once we have those items in place, adopted, I'm happy to work with all of you to put together that package if folks want it posted or information placed on the website.
Okay, so that sounds like your response was that it could happen later, and that's more because the ordinances follow from the plan. So
Yeah, they're
while they,
literally not introduced. I couldn't attach them to the housing plan right now if I want, if you directed me to.
those which don't exist yet, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And can I just ask, like, what is a closed session and what would it take to have a closed session?
Ed, can you take that one?
Yes, under the Open Public Meetings Act, there's an attorney-client exception to conducting a meeting in public. A motion would be made to conduct a closed session for me to provide advice to you, legal advice to you, in a confidential fashion. If the motion passes, we go in a closed session. Mechanically, I'd have to defer to Eileen how we do that in the program that we have. And we go in a closed session. I will give you the advice, answer any legal questions that you may have, and then that closed session would be adjourned, and you'd come out in open session and you proceed with the balance of the meeting.
Unfortunately, in the Zoom platform, I can't do that, a closed session. I would have had to know in advance to set up a different meeting with a different password that's only available to board members. And then I would have to have somebody stay here, but because this is just one, I don't have a meeting set up
Understood.
for it.
So that means we can't have one even if we wanted to.
It appears that way. Yes.
Okay. So Ed, you read a few paragraphs to us,
Yes.
and those would be the language if someone were to make a motion upon which we would act.
That is correct.
Okay. So that said, does anybody want to make a motion for this evening, given the discussion we have had?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, do we have a second? I will second the motion.
Gaston Halbert,
No.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Deborah Nevis,
No.
Sujatha Shan,
No.
Diane Eglo,
No.
Srini Vijay,
No.
Allison Canfield? Did I lose Allison?
I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute. I'm an alternate. Am I allowed to vote? Or are there not enough?
You are voting because we are marked down to members.
Got it. Yes.
Daniel Bear?
I'm going to go back to what council said tonight, that our constitutional obligation kind of, again, I'm going to use the term ties our hands. It does tie our hands. And irrespective of how we feel about how the densities should be at each site is essentially irrelevant, because an agreement was made with the courts to establish these densities. And I hear everybody tonight, and I respect what everybody said tonight. And I hope they had that opportunity to say those things to the township committee when they were developing this plan. But unfortunately, we have to do what we have to do, and we have to stay within our parameters. So my vote tonight is yes.
That's all.
Yes.
Sujatha, did you have a question? I just see her hand raised. Where did she go? Okay.
Nope, she moved. She's okay.
Okay.
Sorry, what is the final vote?
Final vote is 4 yes, 5 no.
Okay, so it is not
Does
not
pass.
passed. Okay. That is the conclusion of our meeting.